Good morning. Thanks for coming out. At least it's not snow, so we're not going to complain. This is why we live in God's country here. I'm going to give you guys what I consider the reason why I'm so tired talk. And Amancio's heard this, and my other friend Isidore's heard some of this over the years. But it's like every time I talk about what we've done, it's like, holy crap, what the heck's been going on? And you know, some people come and move to places and they think, this is gonna be easy, I'm gonna skate. Well, I've been here in the valley 12 years, been coming here for 16 years, and God knows, should have been here 30 years ago or maybe 60 years ago. I am so happy to have come here, and I can say that I've come here and been so pleased with everyone that I have worked with and what I have learned. And I hope that by the time I'm done yakking with you all today that you'll be able to say, wow, those folks over at the university have done a few things that I think have been good for the valley. And well, we'll take it from there. So without further ado, let's hit the first slide because we're going to get through this. I don't even have to answer this question, and when I say how did you get here, I'm not talking about driving from Weslaco. I'm talking about the fact that it's a Saturday morning and you're in a history museum. It's like I'm preaching to the choir. I should have on my robes, which would be later today, but like I said, I'm playing hooky from graduation. I'm going to the basketball game instead. Push that button. You know, was it a special? Next thing, just keep going. I'm going to flash. Was it a relative that made you interested in history? Were you the youngest child, and so your mother had enough time to talk to you, but your older siblings had to work? Maybe a good teacher, maybe a class in college that really jazzed you about stuff, college or high school. Is there anything else? Maybe your own experience, just saying, well, I'm older than dirt. That's what I keep telling people as an archaeologist. It helps to have experience with these things. But then there's this quote. Hit it again. I love this quote. I read this when I was in college. And this poem ends with the line, the days that make us happy make us wise. And you think about it. When you go through really good things in your life, you remember those things. And the bad things, you do everything you can to get rid of it. So I like to think that all of you are here because something about your environment and a place about where you live, you're happy to know about what makes this such a special place. And also because we want to leave something behind that will tell the story. I stand in this room and I am in awe. I am in awe because this is my family. I see people here from World War I, World War II, from Vietnam. I grew up in this. This is a wonderful tribute to these folks that served in this country, for this country, as is the whole museum about its story. I'm with the CHAPS program. I got to wear my outfit today that my colleagues at the university say, are you a janitor? You know, and it's like, oh, thanks. And what do we do? And Amancio could answer all these things because poor guy has been through all these talks. We work locally. You know, lots of academics will always go and they'll say, the more exotic place you work, the more credit you get. If you work locally, everyone says, oh, that's easy. Who knows anything about local politics and tell me it's easy? We work on local stuff. You can see we teach not just college students and graduate students. One of our graduate students is here today. But we work with K through 12 educators. We do all kinds of stuff like this. We do lots of stuff with the community, and we do a lot of stuff. I'm doing this pitch, you're all saying I sound like an administrator. Well, I kind of am, but that's okay. We do this kind of education. Next slide, keep going. We are, bam, something called the STEAM. Everyone talks about STEM, STEM, STEM. Well, STEM doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you can't locate it within the larger context of where things come from. So, you know, we're involved with these things, and if you want to call history and anthropology or the social sciences arts, go for it. But the bottom line is it helps give us sense. Next slide. You can see there's a lot of writing here. You should never have a lot of writing on slides, but I do it. Because if you look up here, you may recognize some aspect of your life. And I know, Amanso, you spent all these years in education and everything else, but you go down this list of things and it's like, all these folks have worked with the CHAPS program. People in Mexican-American studies, people in translation. I've worked with public administrators. I've worked with educational psychologists. They're all come into the program because we are an umbrella that works with people. And that's our main goal. We try to, again, enrich what's going on. Next slide. So our mission, next slide, we're educating. We promote our region. We deal with livability and sustainability. And we do it this way, and this is something, we all do it, this is life, but you know, sometimes at universities, sometimes the people who teach need the most education. You know, you gotta recognize opportunities. I've got young faculty that come to campus and they do this. It's like, no, you don't put your hand out. You gotta come and you gotta make your opportunities. You gotta see where you're gonna fit in. You gotta make these things happen. You gotta recognize, and God knows, I think we all know this, life is not a straight line. Anyone that tells you they had a plan and they got to this place because they're special is either smoking something, and I'd like to meet them then, or they're lying to you just outright, because all of life is made up of zigs and zags, right? You run into a wall, you find a way around it, over it, under it. So keep going. What did we do? Well, one of the first things, and it was slightly after we got here, was we landed a grant. It's the biggest grant I've ever had in my life. $100,000 from National Endowment for the Humanities. What did we do? We worked with some teachers, and one of the things we recognized was that place-based education was what mattered. You want people to understand where they live, and you know, far too often, and you guys can think about this, I'm sure it happens here and anything else. Everyone says, oh, nothing happened here, we're going to San Antonio. Nothing happened here, we're going to go someplace else. I grew up outside in New York City, and it's like no one in New York City ever goes to the Statue of Liberty until someone comes in from out of town. We should do this more often, you know, that kind of thing. We don't appreciate where we are, what we do. And so, again, a lot of our students, our K through 12 folks and others will come and we've all heard these stories. Gee, why do we only hear about the Pilgrims? Why don't we hear about Escondón and the villages down here? Well, part of it is we gotta teach it. We gotta get it into the educational system. And you gotta do that with people that are passionate about it, that are here, and will work with teachers and not just say, here's an add-on, let's find a way to make it fit with TEKS and STAR and all that stuff. I know how to play the game. You know, I haven't lived this long because I don't. We've done everything I'm going to tell you the rest about with little grants. That money gave us the creds. But I have spent the last dozen years like this, just like everyone else. But the difference is we've produced. And as my colleague back there, my good friend Dr. Flores can attest, money attracts money. If you are successful, granting agencies like to give you some money. So we've gotten little grants from all these folks through time. None of the ones here have ever landed us more than $20,000. A lot of times it's $1,500, it's $5,000. We've done it because there's been a lot of dedicated people like myself that will chew their arm off to make it happen, or we take advantage of graduate students and we work them to death. Next slide. Now, and usually I save this for the end, but this is how I prove to you that I haven't been lying. If awards mean something, sort of like watching The Wizard of Oz, you know, you need a testimonial. Well, here are my testimonials, not mine, but the program's. We've been recognized by the Texas Archaeological Society, by the Texas Historic Commission. Next slide. We've gotten international recognition from the Society for Historical Archaeology that have compared the work we've done here with work that's been done in Europe. You know, it's sort of like, wow, this is pretty cool. And in Canada, the State House, when they aren't doing other crazy things up in Austin, have actually recognized the program twice in 17 and just earlier this session. We've received the Chairman's Award. We have received just this year the Mary Fay Barnes Award for Community Projects, Oral History. did 125 oral histories. Farming families, people in Rio Grande City, and materials dealing with the last year with COVID. And again, two of the folks that are here, Dr. Flores and Gabriel Zuna, were part of that thing that we did this. We've been recognized for that, and it was kind of a trifecta, the Governor's Award. We've got some creds, and if you think that I don't play it up every time I go over and I say, can I have $20, can I have, I do. And that's how we get the little bit of money to do things. I want to show you, though, what we've done. Recognizing opportunities. And I'm going to keep using that as my mantra today. And again, we're going to keep with this. Everything from films, these oral histories, traveling exhibits, which you've seen here at the museum, dealing with now the creation of a new program at the university called Public Heritage. It's going to look at it. I'm going to give you an overview of what we've done. And again, I will say, how did we do it? Poco a poco, right? It's not happening immediately. You build on it. You build on it with goodwill, and you come up with ideas, and you say, we can't do this now, but maybe we can do it in a year. We've done it, and we're moving forward further. Working with school kids. When I came, back in the days, as we've been talking back and forth, of the university whose name I'm not allowed to say anymore, and I was working here, they said, well, we're really happy to have you here, but we're going to give you no resources. You have no lab space, you have nothing. Everyone said, how come you're not digging something up? I said, because I've spent an entire career digging up stuff, and I've had lab space and other stuff. I'm not digging up more stuff. We don't need to dig up more stuff. We need to work with people and educate. Working with school kids. Doing all kinds of stuff with school kids, thousands of school kids and teachers. Community engagement. Some of you used to come out to the old archaeology fair that would be held down there at Palo Alto, working with people, teaching kids. That used to be the dean. She is now up in New York State. The woman over there, her children are all grown. Working with folks in the valley who have found materials and identifying it. The late Bobby Lovett on the left, and in the middle, Juan Gonzalez, my colleague who's co-directing with me, and working with the African American community up at Restlawn Cemetery. We've worked across at lots of engagement, getting involved and doing stuff. Next slide. We started doing other projects, and these are things that hit me as we move forward. You know, I'm an old guy. My parents are gone. But my grandmother lived to be 106 years old, right? 106 years old. My parents made it to 90 and 91. I am blessed. And I know how much I've talked to them and everything else, but one thing I learned is, short of a seance, all of my conversations now with my folks are one-sided. Right? You can only talk to people when they're there to communicate back unless you have a Ouija board, okay? I'll leave that to you guys to have your Ouija board at home. And I got here, and one of the first places I went up the road to Rio Grande City, and I'm there with an old friend of mine from Michigan State. You know, we were talking about Michigan State. He had come out to visit, and we drive up there, and we're at Fort Ringgold. And he gets out of the car, and he's originally from West Virginia and Kentucky. And so he always, Russ, this is great. And he's kind of hopping around thinking, do you need to go to the bathroom, Steve? You know, this thing. He said, no, my people were here. I looked at him and I said, what are you talking about? And he says, well, I've been working on this stuff in eastern Kentucky. African-American troops, it was a camp where they were bringing them in during the Civil War, and they were being made into the U.S. colored troops. And they came and served here in the valley in the 1860s and beyond, and they were at Fort Ringgold. And we're talking about all this, and I'm talking to people, and there were folks still alive at Rio Grande City who would have been 20 years old in 1940. And I said, we got to interview these people. We got to interview these people because they have stories. You know, how many people were dating a soldier who then shipped off to Burma and never came back? What kind of stories are there? Never had any money, couldn't find any money, finally got a little bit of dough, and we started interviewing people. And by God, the story that came out was not the story so much about the fort, but about what happened when the fort ceased being a fort and became the school district. Fort Ringgold was going to be a tuberculosis hospital. That was a big battle down here in the 1940s. Instead, they went this route. So we created oral histories and a film about it. And it's, you know, people in Rio Grande City show this now in the schools. Say, this is why we are where we are. Little stories like that, that again, are fleeting stories because there's no one left. The person I wanted to interview died the year before, right? Time and tide wait for no man or woman. When we go, we go. Next one. So, I don't know if we've brought this, have we brought this exhibit to you guys? The Fort Brown exhibit? This is another one of these things that are timing. As you know, with the creation of the university here, see, I have to use these words carefully. With the creation of this university, I no longer would go down to Cameron County and Brownsville as a visitor. I would go down there as an employee. And I was teaching down in Brownsville campus, and of course was there, and I have friends with the National Park Service working at Palo Alto and at Resaca de la Palma. And of course, there's the old golf course, and there's the earthworks from the fort that date back. It's the only standing architecture in the United States tied to the US-Mexican War. The only stuff. And who owns the property? All this stuff is going on. So I get together with colleagues from the history department, colleagues from the National Park Service. We teach a class with the students designing an exhibit on Fort Brown. We didn't think we were ever going to make the exhibit a reality. We designed the whole thing, it was done, and then my dean, my boss said, well, we're going to have this event in Brownsville, what could we do? And I said, well, we could create the exhibit, it's all ready to go, I just need, how much? You know, it was like $5,000, you know, chump change. They gave it, we created the exhibit has traveled up and down the valley, been seen by about 5,000 to 6,000 people. We ended up not only creating a walking tour guide of it, done in both Spanish and English with podcasts in Spanish and English. I know where we live. I know what the first language is here. Like I said, Amancio kept me honest on this crap decades ago. I know where we live. We ended up then taking the exhibit, which is still traveling, but we created a flip book, working with people in translation. One side you want to look at it, it's in English. You flip it over, it's all in Spanish, right? It tells the story. I love this stuff. You know, you guys are here, little races with pigs. I love it. You know, I was looking at your exhibits. You've got stuff here of mission back in the same time period around World War I. This is one of our crowning achievements that we've done, again, with local history, just as I see here in Mission. And one of the things that I looked at, and I spent nearly 2 decades in what you have probably heard of, it's known as Silicon Valley, right? San Jose, San Francisco, and California. I spent almost 20 years working there. It was hard to live there because it's really expensive. And when I got there, I saw lots of folks who now I look like, because I'm as old as they were then, and they were hearkening back to their childhood in World War II and elsewhere, and they were saying, well, you know, when we were kids coming up, this was known as the Valley of Heart's Delight, kind of like this was known as the Magic Valley. That was the Valley of Heart's Delight. Oh, that's an interesting thing. Great agricultural land, everything else. Now, instead of growing fruit and vegetables, they grow silicon chips, right? Expensive silicon chips. They had seen in the course of their lifetime everything go, not a field or an orchard left. When I moved here, and I first visited here in 2004, it was 10 years after NAFTA. things were changing. I was talking to people and they were telling me about Trenton being a 2-lane caliche road. Now it's 6 lanes and it all looks like everything else, right? Everything developing. And I started to meet people in Edinburg. And the nice thing about Edinburg is we know Edinburg didn't exist before 1908. And let's be honest with you, location. The university's there, I've got students there, let's do something locally. And I said, we need to capture the stories of the people that built this community. Long before there was a NAFTA, long before there was a UTRGV, Pan-American College, Edinburg Community Junior College, long before that, there were farmers. And we started working with these families. And we did all kinds of stuff, archaeological, biological, geological surveys, oral histories, families from England, from Belgium, from Germany, from Mexico, Sweden, Ukraine, all these places. Next picture. We did biological surveys, found out interesting stuff. Everyone's going, why are you doing biological surveys? Because, and again, I learned this from stuff. Do you know who finds most archaeological sites? Farmers, not archaeologists. Who knows more about their land than anyone else? Farmers. Not anyone else. So we go out and we not only did biological surveys, what did we see, but we asked people how things had changed through their lives. And it's, oh yeah, we had bobcats on our property, we had this. And I had people tell me time after time after time, when I was a kid, there were horned lizards everywhere. But you know what's funny? After 1967, I never saw another horned lizard on my property. They didn't put together that Hurricane Beulah pushed probably pesticides and other stuff into areas where these animals were. It's like we're picking up information that you wouldn't pick up by doing this kind of work. Next slide. My colleague, Dr. Gonzalez, is out there. He takes the students out. They drill boreholes to look at the soil science in the place. Next thing through it. And you can see them here. All the students are out there. They do a day of survey for biological stuff, a day of survey for geological materials, trying to get these things together, drilling down into it. Let me tell you, when they hit Caliche, they all know about it. God bless them. One of the things that he points out, and I'm gonna have this picture a couple of times, it's just to point out to everyone, between the Nueces and the Rio Grande, water is a precious commodity. Again, we all know that. You only have to drive up north and see the blue barrels. We all know that. We know that there are norias. We know there are other things. But water is a precious commodity. We don't have running water. But what can we learn from this? Next. We can look at the soils, and the soils start telling us a story. This is a soil map. This is Hidalgo County, and we've got the other ones going with it. This is not fly specks. All these little brown spots is this stuff called Raymondville clay, which is near the surface. That's sort of like the other flip side. If you don't have caliche on your property, you're praying God no clay either, right? You don't want that. Well, golly, next slide. And here are those very same things following 1967, where were the flooded areas. There are the flooded areas. Water is retained in these spots, and in fact, oral histories, I'm talking to friends of mine up in McCook, right, just a few miles north of here, and they said, yeah, 2 years afterwards, in 1968 and 69, after the storm, they were water skiing in McCook. Water is held in these places. Now, why is this important? I'll tell you why it's important. You have to live near water. In prehistory, most people lived near the Rio Grande. What happens when the Rio Grande floods? The animals run away, and the people follow them because you can't live here. And where do they go? They go into the interior where water will pool in these places. My colleague, Juan Gonzalez, he's calling these things deflation troughs. I'm sitting there, I'm going, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. And then all of a sudden, this will date me. I think back to movies of my youth, Waterhole number 9, and I go, You mean like a water hole? He looked at me, and I said, I define my life by watching Westerns. That's exactly what this is. And again, we know that some of these places, this water would come there, but it's ephemeral, right? It will evaporate and disappear through time. Well, so gosh, then we take the students out to these farmers' properties and we walk the fields. One of my students, Chantel Brissette, 2 years ago said, I never have found anything. My father has found stuff. I don't know, I would really love to. And there it was 5 o'clock. We're heading, not 5 o'clock, it's getting on to 7 because it's getting dark. She's walking back to the car. She looks down and she finds it. I said, well, sometimes you get lucky. You find these things. But, next slide. Just for a second, take a look. Here are some of the places where we have worked. And I want you to notice. Here is where we have found things. Here's sort of just a circle showing how far it is. And I want you to notice it juxtaposed to where there was water in the past. People are not going to H-E-B to get bottles of water in prehistory. They got to walk to these places. They need these things. So we start figuring out where people lived. Okay, so anyway, you saw the other picture. So let's just for a moment talk about some of these families. And I put this in here because some of these names may mean something to you guys. So many times, just this past Monday, we had worked with the Kiefer family. You can see it up here. We don't have a cover for them yet because the project just finished Monday, or not finished, we're in phase 2 of it now. And there we've got one of the other family members there, and they're talking about Joe Metz, who lives here south of Mission, has the property down near the river. And these guys all knew each other because they all grew up together. And you got to remember, when you're in your 80s, the number of people that were living here in the 1940s and 50s were a whole lot fewer than they are today. Every family knew every other family. But what begins to get interesting is seeing why folks came here. And I'm going to get political, so if you don't like it, just take it easy for a second. When we talk about why does everyone want to come to the United States? Well, I'll tell you one thing. It's real interesting. The Fikes and the Kiefer families, not that they were related, but they all came from an area of Europe known as Alsace-Lorraine, which has shifted back and forth behind French control and German control over the last century plus. And they came right around 1850. And my students, being the lazy students that they are, they look up Alsace-Lorraine and they talk about the Franco-Prussian War, which happened in 1870. And I have to grab people by their lapels and shake them and say, what kind of time continuum do you live in? That's 20 years after they moved here. What happened before that? Well, if you know anything about at least European history, 1848 is a real important time. That's when guys like, I'm on a roll and I fell off that roll. Marx is out there writing, and they're involved in all the revolutions are taking place across Europe. Alsace was one of the places where it happened a lot. People needed to get out at the end of that thing. They were looking for new opportunities. Folks like them came at that point in the 1850s. All those Polish families up in McCook, they didn't come to McCook. They came up into central Texas. Why? 1848. They weren't in Poland at that point. That was Prussian Poland in those days. They came at that point. Why did they come to the United States? They don't like people pointing guns at them. They're looking for new opportunities. Why did my grandparents come here? Same damn reason. They would have killed each other in World War I because one was Imperial Russia and the other one was Austria. So we take it from there. These guys come here. Where do they go first? In this case, they're in the Midwest. Makes sense. Keep in mind that it isn't until after 1848 that this is even part of the United States. And when do they come down here? Those land trains. Those land trains that figure prominently here in the museum and elsewhere, that brings them here. It's a new opportunity. And of course, if it wasn't for those trains, the other key thing is water. Water and trains. You need them, it's the chicken and egg. That's what makes this place take off. Next family. The Norquests. Norquests were the folks that got me in as dearest people in the world. From Sweden. gosh, everyone said, why don't we have people from Sweden? Why did they all come in the 1860s? If you watch that show that was about the building of the railroads, and there were all these Swedes working on the railroads in the 1860s. Well, they didn't come here because they wanted to serve in the American Civil War. They were leaving Sweden because people were starving to death on the streets. They didn't have food. They were in a bad place economically. They came here, they were working on the railroads up there, and by the 1920s, the grandfather, who had been a young man when he came, was feeling like it would be nice to live in a warm place his last years. And he came down here with his son and his daughter. They bought property in the 1920s, and it is his grandson, Kelly Norquist, who, again, Amancio knows because we had breakfast with him all the time, come in. When did they come down? The land trench, right? It's all happening at the same time. Next slide. Well, I just want to get through this because it's great stuff. Everyone will say, well, what about the other families? Well, we've worked with two families, the Cantus and the Lunas. These folks were farmers in Mexico. You know, maybe not extravagant farmers, but they were farmers. They were doing well. Well, we all know about the revolution. You know, one week you have Villa pointing a pistol at your head, and the next week you have Carranza pointing a pistol at your head. There's a certain point when you say, this sucks. And they came up and they established themselves here. And we've gotten to work with them. You know, it's the American story. People coming to make a better lives for themselves. And finally, this one, I like telling this story. This family blew me away. The Rogers family, Rogers Road, one of them changed their name to that, but the Rogers were from Belgium. And these were folks that I would refer to as a bird of passage. My great-grandfather was a bird of passage. That means he would leave Austria and Poland, he came over to work, he went back, made my great-grandmother pregnant, left, came back and forth, right? Birds of passage going back and forth. The father came over at the beginning in 1907, came first, worked up in Galveston, helping to rebuild the place after the great hurricane of 1899, right? 1900, whatever year that was. Had a job, went back. We started to do some digging around. Why did he leave? Oh yeah, because at that point in time, Belgium was one of the countries that said, if you're wealthy, you don't have to go in the service. If you don't, we're going to take you in the service and we're going to keep you in as long as we want. It's a good reason not to maybe stay in a place if you don't want to spend your life in the army, right? Back and forth. So he comes here, establishes himself in Kansas, making money hand over fist during World War I, sending food back while his brother and sister and all these relatives are in the middle of Belgium, the rape of Belgium by the Germans, Imperial German forces. At the end of the war, they all come over to Kansas. They come down on the immigrant trains, establish themselves there. The first wife dies. He marries the daughter of his cousin who was here. These folks were speaking Flemish and playing their version of bocce ball, which is not with balls, but with discs, into the early 1960s. We've got pictures of this, right? Every one of these families have favorite foods. They have everything else, and they all tell the same stories. When we were little, the only language we could speak was Polish or German or something. And then we started playing with the kids, and we all learned Spanish. And it wasn't until we all went to school that we all learned how to speak English. This is our story. This is a very unique place. This last time, and this is something that, again, Isidore Flores and Gabriel were involved with, you have to be able to recognize an opportunity. COVID is not an opportunity. 1,000 people were diagnosed with it again this week. It's not over, sports fans. I'm glad you've got masks on. I've got 3 shots, and I'll go out and back and spray myself down before I get in the car with my Lysol. Not that I don't trust you, but we could not do a farming family. Number one, it's getting hard to find them because, you know, there aren't many farming families left. As my friends used to say in Illinois, you know how you make a small fortune in farming? Start with a large one. It's hard work to be a farmer. That's why my grandparents left Europe. That and wars and everything else, but they left because they didn't want to be farmers. And now we have corporate farms, and we're also building dollar stores on top of some of the finest agricultural property in this damn world down here, but that's something else. And so one of the things we said is we can't do this. We can't go and interview, old goats like me and older, because who knows if they're going to get sick and die. So we took our students and we said, what we want to do is, how has COVID changed your life? This was, 5 months after the lockdown. And over the course of that fall, not only did everybody go out and work, Gabriel worked with the Roman Catholic Church talking about how the things changed. How do you do Mass in a time when you can't have face-to-face and give communion, right? We had other people who had family members who died, other people who ran locations for quinceaneras. You can't do that. Isidore came and spoke about the whole role of public health and why it's an important thing to do. Well, we put that all together. We just published it. It just came out. You got to wait for your copy till I see you. I didn't expect to see you here today. This just came out. We're trying to tell the story, a snapshot, because the snapshots that we get here tend to be of bad things about where we live. We're like, oh, I've got friends, closest friend in the world, guy was the best man at my wedding. His wife would not allow their daughter to come here because heaven forbid she might get shot by the cartel people that are in the parking lot of the university. That's what people think of. And newspaper articles that talk about how down here we're ground zero for the sickness. We're trying to tell the story about resilience. How do people deal with it? And again, no one knows more about this than Gabe because he edited the whole damn thing. God bless you, buddy. Next picture. This thing you've heard a lot about, and I'm looking at the clock, but I'm good. I'm not going to keep you long. I promise. I know how to work a crowd, man. I'll tell you, I'm good at this. You guys hosted the Civil War Trail. This is one of these things, looking for an opportunity. Next slide. Why do a Civil War Trail? You can just flash through things. Timing, right? Oh yeah, 150th anniversary. This is before our most recent insanity, but at that point I still had family alive. I would drive back and forth across the country, and you'd go to places and say, oh, there's Civil War Trail, Civil War Trail. We come to Texas, there's nothing. Lots of jingoism, nothing here. But we say education. Education doesn't just take place in the classroom. It takes place in a place like this. It takes place going out and seeing things. Community pride can build to tourism. It's a sustainable development. It's economic development, and will help public heritage. Well, we've been successful on all these levels with it, and I'll go on with it more, but so we did all that. And if you remember this show, God knows I do, and I watched it when I was teaching in Ann Arbor that year, God, in 1990. And go ahead, yeah, that's okay, we'll leave it here for a second. If you watch that movie again, all 8 sections of it or whatever it was, as far as they're concerned, nothing happened west of the Mississippi. The story that is told, rightfully so, is a story of carnage. Lots of people died in the Civil War. And if you're old enough to remember Paul Harvey, and most of you are, the rest of the story is where this comes from. So we looked at this and we said there are other stories. In the Texas, next slide, what's important with the story here is the story about cotton. Cotton was a big thing. It was a cash crop. And you can see what it was worth. If you know anything about the Civil War, they blockaded everything. But they didn't blockade down here Brownsville and Matamoros. And the reason is it's an international boundary. They could not blockade it. Stinking war probably lasted another year. Killed more than 100,000 more people because war materials were able to keep flowing in because that was the situation. But that was one story here. Next slide. The other story is the other white gold. Of course, there's a third white gold, but we won't go into that. The second white gold here, besides cotton, is salt. And we often think about salts going, oh, it's not good for my blood pressure. That isn't the point. Salt is something else. If you like pickles, salt is a preservative. You brine things with it. You tan leather with it. Think about the armies of the 19th century. leather, shoes, belts, equipment, saddles. Salt is important. Wagons would come down filled with cotton and go back filled with salt. Salt, all right. All these people served in Palo Alto. 15 years before the war started, they learned what people would eat that give them indigestion, and they learned how to kill each other. That's why so many people died, because they were Confederates and Union. This guy, next slide, Robert E. Lee was here, but he was Colonel Robert E. Lee. I've had to have some serious discussions with people up in Rio Grande. It says, well, they're taking down all these statues, let's put them up here. I said, the hell you're gonna do that? Those are statues to a traitor. This is Colonel Robert E. Lee. I'm gonna get in trouble. Lots of people here had family members. They're so proud of them that served on both sides, but some of them have added materials in there. It says Civil War vet. They want to make it clear. We have families that have fought for the United States for 160 years, 70 years. Of course, we also have ones that served with the Confederacy. I saw this picture when my daughter was in St. Joseph's, and one of the students there was descended from these folks, and he said, well, this was a great uncle or a great great uncle served with this. Next slide picture. People, you know, down here when we were talking about this, they all said, why are you putting in stuff about Mexico? How do you teach Texas history if you don't teach Mexican history? You can't. There's a civil war taking place across the river at the same time as there's a civil war here. You have to talk about these things. So we talked about that. The other thing we talked about is the fact that no one ever teaches this. Now that, you know, that we talk about Underground Railroad, but it's always across the Ohio. We had it coming down here too. And they were coming down here, and again, my colleague, Roseanne Batchegarz, has spoken to you guys about this. She's become like the cottage industry on this. She's like the expert down here on this stuff. But these folks were all involved in it. So we've tied into the African American community here. Next slide. Push it again. Yeah. African American soldiers, the ones that were from Kentucky I told you about, served at Palmito Ranch, served up here, and in fact, they bivouacked at the end of the war outside of Roma at a place that we call today Los Negritos Creek. It's like, I wonder how it got that name, you know, duh. Next one. After the war, all these posts were rebuilt, right? McIntosh, Brown, and Ringgold. And I always tell this story, and it's with shame. I grew up with these things because we had no money. My father would get them for $1 from the U.S. Army. And I remember looking at this picture for 50 years. And we started doing this work, and I went up to the Buffalo Soldiers Museum, and it was hanging up there, and I go up and I go, why is this hanging here? And I walked up, and for the first time in 50 years, I realized I saw the 2 white guys in the front. I never saw the 30 black guys behind them. If you can teach an old dog new tricks like that, it's a good thing. We're getting there. We're going to get through this. We've done films, A Letter from Roma, guys who were based there at the end of the Civil War, Ferry Ride to Freedom about the Underground Railroad. We've done work in Restlawn Cemetery, the segregated black cemetery in Edinburg, where there's a lot of graves that don't have markers, and we've been able to identify grave lots through archaeological work. We've done lesson plans for not just college students, but through 4th and middle school. We've done traveling trunks for teaching purposes. This little book, I think you can buy it for $9 on lulu.com, been really popular. We've thousands of them been sold. We published a couple books through Texas A&M Press on this to educate people. Traveling exhibit, which you've had here, it's been seen by more than 50,000 people, and God knows it would have been well over 100,000 because it was in Corpus Christi when COVID came, but that's, don't get me excited. Next picture. Bilingual flip book again. Got to know who you're working, where you live. Next one. And a film. Next one. We're going to get through this. We're marking the trail. You may see some of these. People don't always think that. It's hard for me to find money, but sometimes maybe somebody wants to make a donation and they'll put their name on it, or it'll be in a community. So you may see these up here. This is what we're working on right now. This has been a 12-year thing. We're going to make it, and I'll get out of here. This is a crowning glory and why it has taken so long for this work. And this project started in earnest in 2019. We're about to have some great stuff happen in the spring. You will notice the river, you will notice the ocean, palm trees, elephants, volcanoes, and prehistoric points. Next slide. This is the first draft of a map that is coming. This is the coastline 20,000 years ago, and a fishing boat pulled up the leg of an elephant, a mammoth, from out here 15 miles offshore. It's on display out at the RGV thing. This is the coastline 27 million years ago. This is the coastline 42 million years ago. Every one of these things have an impact on our environment and on how people live through here. Next slide. The oldest thing that we have in this region is a meteor. Came down in 1956 in Cameron County. It wasn't flat like that. The Smithsonian took that piece. But it is on display up at the university. What's important, you may say, oh, it's 4.6 billion years old. Sure, but we believe it came down and was probably seen by native peoples when it came down, because we think it came down about in the last 5,000 years. One can imagine sitting there and watching this thing come down. Pretty cool. We're going to flip through these. If you go up to Roma Bluffs and you look at the houses there and you say, oh yeah, this is really neat, you are standing, or up by Chapeno Rapids, you are standing on the beach from 42 million years ago. That is Roma Sandstone. Gosh, if you stand there and you look at the Vale House or the Cox House, or you go up to San Ignacio and the Trevino Fort, those are all built out of Roma Sandstone. So we are using these materials to do this. The other thing that we find up there are huge oysters. These babies are like this. And you may say, so why do I care about 42 million year old oysters? You may not care about them, but the people who built these houses burned those oysters to make mortar, to be able to put the bricks together, to whitewash the interior of the houses. We're using our environment. Next one. 27 million years ago, the huge volcano took off. This volcano, where was it located? In the Sierra Madre in Mexico. It's at least 500 kilometers from here. We have evidence of this volcano all the way from Mexico, south of us, into Alabama. Huge. We have an exposure, and there's Juan Gonzalez there. We have exposures of this volcanic ash in the Rio Grande City area that are more than 60 feet in depth. We sampled them. My colleague from the Smithsonian sampled it for us. We did all the work on it. It was a single volcanic event. You may say, wow, well, that's something. Why is it there? It's right on the edge of what was the coast. You can go to places and see the marine sediments under it, but there's good things that come out of it. Next picture. What do you do with that volcanic ash? Oh, that volcanic ash, Kelly Norquist's cousin and his father mined that volcanic ash, and that volcanic ash was used to build Falcon Dam. People will use it for that. What else happens with that volcanic ash? Well, interesting thing, because most of the stone tools that we find made and used by native peoples form in the ocean. This didn't form in the ocean, it filled out of the volcanic ash. You can see some of it here in the next picture. Some of this stuff fluoresces. You may say, why is that important? I'll say, you are aware we have uranium mines north of us, right? The uranium was part of the volcanic ash. Next picture. This is the chert that was made. We find these stone tools down here. It makes up 10% of the materials used by native peoples over 12,000 years. It's this resource. Next picture. It not only did that, it created a petrified forest. You can see this house in Roma. They made a picket fence out of petrified logs. Petrified wood points. Petrified wood decorates the church in Roma, the grotto in Rio Grande City, and other people use petrified wood for that. Next one. The river, of course, has a story. You can look at the river with the great oxbows. You can see past ones here. Quite interesting because you go and you say, oh yeah, we've got right here south of town, Old Monte. This is a 900 to 1,000-year-old tree. This tree used to stand on the edge of the river. The river has moved a mile away. It's a dynamic river. Joe Metz keeps this alive because he keeps water going on it. It's the oldest thing that's on the river.
What kind of tree?
It's a Montezuma cypress. Here, changing landscape. Map from 1912 overlaid with modern one. You get a sense of it. You can see old oxbows here. Dynamic river. Almost done. Once again, water resources, real interesting. So, go up to the northern end of the county, San Isidro, all right, the Norias. And you look and you go, wow, this is really something. People didn't start running cattle until there was water. You couldn't run much cattle because remember those deflation troughs didn't hold water for long. To get to these things, water could be 50 feet down. These things are being chopped out. All the caliche that's coming out of this is what builds the superstructures, and you can see caliche pits here later in the 20th century, but builds houses in the interior. Along the river, they're building houses upriver with Roma Sandstone. If you're living up in the county, you're building houses out of caliche. There are no trees. And if you're living here and in points downriver, you've got your jacals, just like you've got in your museum exhibit. The resources that are available, it's not because one is better, it's called, what do you have? Almost done. We have the South Texas sand sheet that we talk about. We have animals here I've told you about. This tusk came from La Jolla. This is the leg from off the coast. And this tooth is also from this here in the county. Giant bison teeth found here. These bison's shoulders would have been up by the ceiling of this compared to the modern bison that Isidore used to have at his house. They're still Ice Age animals, but these were big ones. Almost done. We are about to publish this, and it will be out this spring. We'll make sure you guys get one. This poster has cost me more money than God. 30,000 bucks. You can take every one of these points and spin them in 360 degrees. There are 7 movies embedded in this, each one about a minute long. Powerful stuff. Every point on here is from our region, and they are identified to the location, and they are made to actual size. This is the 3rd iteration of this poster. We've done never anything like this. Nothing like this exists anywhere in the world. This is a first. This book will be released by the end of February, dealing with the ancient landscapes of South Texas. Many of the things I've talked about here is we're building toward it. We have a film coming as well. Hopefully we're going to start seeing signs here. It'd be really nice to see you guys sponsor one down there to get people over to the tree. When you're ready, you can I'll pass the hat. I think I'm almost done. Okay, this is the last one. I'm going to shut up and leave it from there. We have been doing this for 12 years. If I pat myself on the back, it's basically because if I don't, I'm going to fall over on the floor anyway, so I got to be careful with that. I think we've been successful. I think we've been successful. We have made it a point that we do not work independent. We work with members of the community. We do not compete with museums. We work with museums. We send students to work in places because we can't do that. But we are very excited about the fact that just this year and beginning this coming academic year, we have now a new academic program at the university called Public Heritage. We're trying to get students educated not just in traditional history, not just in traditional anthropology, but in museums and how they work and dealing with ideas of working with companies, right? How can we do things here that would be sustainable development without destroying the world around us? We want students involved in that. And the reality that I'm no spring chicken, and I am counting down about a year and a half and a wake-up call. And at that point, I'm going to sit in my backyard and drink my martini and come to openings here and listen to people talk here. And maybe you can drag me out of retirement to give you some talks. But I want to be able to spend my time with the people who get it. And I just want you to know it's been an honor to speak to you this morning. I'm sorry I went on so long, but hey, I'm a long-winded professor who hasn't talked to real people in a year and a half. I miss you. And so, you know, comments, questions, and scathing rebuttals, I'll take them all. Thank you very much. And you want to pass these around if anyone wants them. They're just information. Sir?
Did you all find any stumbles?
Any what?
Stubble. The pipe, you know, they put the pipe in the stubble to cut part.
Not that I've looked at down here. Are we talking about, you're talking about prehistoric ones or historic ones? Because I've seen them both, but not down here. Are you talking about prehistoric ones? Or?
I've seen some, and I just wondered, I just saw them in May, so
yeah, I've seen those. A lot of those were being done, a lot of it in the Appalachians, and I saw them when I was working back east in my salad years. Just those short things, and then they put a reed into it, you know, rather than the big clay pipes, which are a lot more fragile. But yeah.
Well, they probably, I don't even know if they had tobacco over here.
Well, they certainly had other things, so. Well, that was here, and it certainly is others. Some of the stuff that we've seen here, one gentleman who's it will appear in this book when it comes out, the Ancient Landscapes book, has a piece of property, and again, it's in Starr County. I can't even remember where it is, but it's someplace near Escobaras. And he has a section of exposed Roma Sandstone, right? But it's up away from the river. And there are all of these mortar holes that the native peoples had dug out to process plants back in, you know, prehistory. And it's the only known ones in this region. And the property, he's trying to pass it over to be a preserve so that people can come and see them and everything else. But we've got pictures of them in this book. The oysters that I told you about, fabulous stuff. We went there is a reef along the, just north of Roma, or there's an arroyo going down into the river, and you go down and there are these oysters that are cemented together, larger than your feet. They're huge, these ones I showed you. And we're looking at them, and there's this reef. I feel like I should be, you know, looking down and seeing fish around my ankles. And you step just 10 feet over to one side, and there is a deflated Zodiac and a half a dozen life preservers. You know, this is a main crossing point between Mexico and up here. So it's like, we live in a dynamic place. We know this is going on, but we're trying to tell these stories so that they can go out. In fact, I know, Isidore, you went out with Juan when I was out of town sometime this summer, and he took him on one of these tours. And one of the things we're looking forward to is taking people out, groups of people. We've done this in the past, and to be able to take them to these places so you can see this. And we do an awful lot of a kind of a click and clack thing where Juan will talk all about the natural history, you know, the environmental earth science side, and I'll talk about the human side of this. So again, trying to always tell people, there's a reason why people live in jacals and why they live in homes of caliche or homes of sandstone. It's because it's location, location, location. Any other questions? I don't bite. Sir?
I'm sort of curious about the changing coastline of South Texas. Is that you think that due from uplift, or is that accretion, or combination of factors?
For what part?
The coastline, you know, how it's you know, so much further inland.
Well, that, you know, I wish Juan was here to handle that. You know, part of it is subsidence has taken place, and of course that's why when we look at like the Pleistocene one, when sea levels were so much lower because everything was trapped in continental glaciers during, you know, 20,000 years ago, so sea levels dropped 300 feet. And that's why the continental shelf off of Texas here would have been about another 30 miles out to sea, more or less. Florida would have been twice its size. The Yucatan would have been probably a third larger, you know, that thing during the last ice age. So there's a situation where there was exposed land that is now submerged. when we talk about this stuff here, there is these changes, and this, when you're talking about 42 million years ago, that's what, almost 25 million years since the big asteroid killed all the dinosaurs back in 65 million years ago, something like this. And the continents are moving. So again, what's actually happening is unclear, but I can tell you this. When that volcanic ash came down, you can go up there to Rio Grande City, and there's which arroyo is it? Almost? Is that it? Is that one up there? There's one up there by Rio Grande City, but starts with an O. And you can look, and you can see the volcanic ash, and at the bottom, there is this kind of greenish clay that's known as Frio, the Frio Formation. It has got marine microorganisms in it. That's what was the bottom of the water in that place there on the shoreline as the ash came down and settled on top of it. So we have this unbroken thing from before 27 million years ago, it's ocean, and then in 27 million years ago, all that ash comes up. And what's really interesting is in Rio Grande City, where that ash is truncated, the next thing that shows up is this Goliad gravels. And those Goliad gravels are only about 6 million years old. And as Juan puts it, it's kind of like when you go to Grand Canyon and you're looking and you go, wow, there's a really big hole in the ground. And they're talking about all the layers. And they say, well, this one is 100 million years old. And the layer above it is 60 million years old. And you go, so where's the other 40 million years? And of course, all the geologists go, because the things erode away. They change back and forth. So it's an interesting place. We've got cool geology, just like we have cool history. Sir?
I'm curious where the big volcano in Mexico was compared to modern day, like Monterey or Saltillo or whatever.
Yeah, it appeared that whole Cordillera was lighting up at that time period about, again, 27 million years ago or so. And it's an interesting time period. It's at the end of the Oligocene, and it is a transition into the Miocene, and that is a time period globally where there's a huge amount of volcanic activity taking place in the world. And this is the anthropologist in me coming out. It's just following that in the Miocene that we start seeing for the first time our ancestors, apes, begin to appear. That we're leaving, monkeys and this kind of thing, and we start seeing apes for the first time. And what's happening is all this volcanic activity is taking place. It leads to climate change, the shrinking of the dense equatorial rainforests, this kind of thing, and opening up of savannas in Africa, and that's where we start seeing. But to answer your question about Mexico, there's a whole section of the Sierra Madre is very volcanic. And it is not a question of, we don't know which one, we don't right now, but we should be able to identify it based on the trace elements. Gabriel.
I'm curious, so as you mentioned, a lot has changed in the last, half century or so. Which of these sites is maybe endangered, or which of these sites kind of are the most threatened by border issues or just sort of anthropomorphic change?
Perfect question. I'll give you 3 quick ones. One, Padre Island is going away real fast because of building dams like Falcon. By controlling that for agriculture and everything else, that's good for agriculture, but it's impeding the flow of sediments that come down the river. Those sediments nourish the barrier islands. So what's happening is Padre Island is eroding away. So that's one thing that's from Anthropocene. The border wall, they keep talking, they want to build it right basically over the main plaza in Roma, which is right between where you can actually see these exposures of sandstone, and again would ruin this National Historic Landmark because of that. The third one, and we've seen this very clearly, there in Roma, in Rio Grande City, and just not far from La Jolla, not far from where you used to work, there was a fabulous exposure of these Goliad gravels with pieces of the volcanic ash torn off, and they were deposited at the edge of the road. We'd been going there for years. One day we're going up there taking tours, And there they are with a front end loader scooping up the gravel to pave roads. And so here was this exposure disappearing, and up in Rio Grande City, where there was a beautiful exposure of the ash, the land was for sale, but you know, I'm getting grants of $5,000. I can't buy a piece of property. What am I going to do with a piece of property? Now there is an automobile repair shop there. So there are differentials and front ends of trucks dumped all over it. So every time we go there, I don't know if, did Juan take you to that one, Isidore? No. We have to park at the edge of the road, and they're all there working on trucks going, oh, what are these people doing? And we go over there and we're looking at it. But you know, here was a pristine place that I always looked at and thought, you know, that would be a great place for a little community pocket park, and it could be a little research center that would go into it. On the other side, if we are successful, and the Civil War Trail was the goal, the Civil War Trail pointed out it could be done. It can't be done by egg-headed professors. They're not going to work. But it can be done when you work with people, you know, in museums in Zapata and Laredo and et cetera. We demonstrated it could work. I think we can demonstrate this is going to work, especially because we're working in the schools. Bottom line is, I would love to see that house with the picket fence of petrified logs. I'd love to see Roma open that up as a discovery, you know, clean the house up, do some stuff, and use that as a place for visitors coming through that would stop to go to the birding sites, and on the days when the birds and the butterflies say, screw this, we're watching TV, let them go out and look at Old Monty. Let them look at the volcanic ash. Let them look at the Civil War stuff. Let them learn things about what we call home.